this. And one thing I found very disappointing was that there was never a mention of East Chapel Hill Rotary. Now, we can't blame Chuck for this. Like I said, he passed away over a decade ago. But if he were here, he would gladly make a large extra donation to the fund basket for this mistake. So in his absence, I asked that everyone give at least an extra $1.
Chuck Stone.
Steve, everybody knows Chuck Stone's son. He's a movie producer. He did Mr. 3000, Drumline, and he wrote, produced, directed, and starred in the Budweiser commercials. He said, that was Chuck Stone Jr.
Now, if you bow your heads, say the one constant has changed, I ask that any changes affecting you be ones for the positive. Thank you. Okay, it's hard to believe today's meeting is the last of President Tim's term. Somewhat of a tradition for the Sergeant at Arms to roast the outgoing president during that person's last meeting. Maybe that's why Tim isn't here today. Really, but this time last year, to misquote Mark Anthony, I came to bury my plate about crazy. I discussed his less is more presidential term. Less fundraising, less projects, less. Anyway, this is Tim. I mean, this is Tim. Timmy. You can't have anything negative to say about Tim. I mean, even his nickname brings to mind cute puppy dog, Red Dog. Of course, Red Dog also does sound kind of like the name of a brewery, which is sensible since Tim's been known to down 1 or 6. But Tim was a breath of fresh air at the helm of our club. He made it look easy, which was in large part due to the brilliant choices he made to head his committees. Yes, I'm a Sergeant Arms Committee Chair. Thanks to, but I think we need to recognize all of the chair people, but especially I want to mention Magos in the back here. The work she did as our membership chair. I think we stand now at 138 members. Is that about right? And if all the new members who joined the club during Tim's presidency this past year would stand, I'd like to recognize them and give them a hand. May Tim do such a great job. Well, there were a bunch of new members. But I do have a little bad news, unfortunately. Just completed actuarial study of our roster, taking into account our new members, determined the life expectancy of East Chapel Hill Rotarians is now down to 8.3 years. New members, we're counting on you, Bucky on it. All right, before turning it over to incoming President Felix, I do want to mention last week, most of you know that the UNC baseball team hosted ACC tournament games here the past 2 weekends. We didn't have the ending we would have liked, but it was still a great showing. And the first Friday, the 29th, I was out of town. I couldn't make the game, but I understand there were a lot of members of our club who were there rather than being here where they were supposed to be. But so many, in fact, that Mike Clayton approached Christie, who was also there, and Mike said, "Hey, I think we ought to arrange that everyone here gets a makeup." And she thought about it for a moment and said, "Well, I think that makes sense." But Mike, you're going to have a hard decision to make, because for this to really replicate a Rotary meeting, you're going to have to leave after the second inning. That's right. All right. So that doesn't get a laugh. It's true, fact based on fact. All right. Phil, get me out of here.
Thank you, Steve. I've got some very quick announcements here. There will be no meeting next week. So next week we are not meeting. We have my installation on Saturday, June 21st, at the Carolina Club at 6 p.m. And then the following week, again we are not meeting here. We have the end of Rotary Year Lunch at the Matt Hans Farm. And with that, I'm going to invite Jim Hebner to introduce our guest.
So Lampley, when he walked in today, in the spirit of the week, he was grabbed and handcuffed by the folks sitting in the back of the room, led by Cliff, who have arrested him and captured him at the back table. I wonder, Mike, are you going to release him, Cliff, in time to come up and speak to the rest of us, where he will be able to get in a word edgewise, which I suspect may not have been the case when he was sitting back there beside you. So that's a little overwhelming. So at any rate, we don't know everything that Jim is going to talk about today, because I'm going to ask him, right? We do have a couple of pieces of business. Jim's wonderful book it's just a great story about the real life and the real world, and how you can become an icon and still go home and have all the issues that all the rest of us have to come home to. It's just a really good book. And so we're going to give a copy of the book to someone who wants one. And if you're interested in it, then Randy has put a little Post-it note on every page in front of every plate there. If you don't see it, then she's going to stand up in a second and grab it. Randy, why don't you come take these and pass those along to anybody that doesn't? And then, if you'll write your name on that, she's going to do a little drawing, and we will give away the book to whoever was whoever the drawing. Now, the other thing is that not included in this, and I don't know. The one thing I know about old memories is that no two of us have the same memory. And when I think about Lampley, how you started and then came back, most of you may know by now that his first commercial broadcasting enterprise was at WCHL, and he has been kind to talk about things that happened. He's been nice to me. All I remember about it was that Jim and I talked about life a lot, but otherwise I think I didn't teach him anything that he didn't already know. But there is this important thing, where we're really talking about how Lampley got here today. I might have had something to do with helping him nudge from second base to third base, but the critical player, we have important players and critical players. And the critical player was Bob Holliday. Because without Bob Holliday, Jim, you would have had a good career. It would not have been right here. Some of you may remember Bob, who was the best program director at WCHL, because I measured our program directors by the quality of the talent that they brought in. And I could literally I could follow Steve from and do another half hour on the famous people that came out of the Bob Holliday, the Bob Halen era. But I'm also wondering, Lampley, maybe you can tell us, see, I'm curious, because we didn't talk about that lately, whatever happened to Al Wisk? Because the other critical player that you don't know about was Ruben Arledge and Jack Williams, who was the sports information director at the university. So I was working on the sports network in Lampley. Jack Williams, who's our sports information director, came in one day and says, "Hey, we've got a letter from Rune Arledge at ABC saying that they are looking for a college, a recent college graduate who has broadcasting skills to put on the sideline at our college football games. He says, I think Lampley would be great. Incidentally, you know why we call him Lampley? Because there are a lot of Jims. I'm a Jim, he's a Jim, there are a lot of Jims. Same reason I call Bob Woodruff, because there are lots of Bobs. So, whatever. And I don't want to ask Lampley to tell you all what he calls me when I'm not, because that would not be appropriate. At any rate, so I'm a good letter writer, and I wrote a letter to Rune Arledge. And I can write a good letter, and I thought, God, this is really good. It's just, I had Lampley doing everything. I mean, he invented the cotton gin. You know, it was just amazing whatever. He had done everything. So I get back a letter from Rune Arledge. This is a true story. I get back a letter, and it says, Dear Jim, thank you for your wonderful note about Al Whisk. I've never heard of Al Whisk. And I said, the hell is that all about? And I thought, maybe this is it. So I took the letter, got an early marker, and I wrote, Reuben, our guy's name is Lampley, Jim Lampley, and he could work circles around 12 Al Whisks, whoever the hell that was, and signed it and sent it back. Now, I don't know what happened to Al Whisk, but I think, Jim, you may have told me that you had seen that note somewhere later when you showed up there, when you were talking to the secretary of whoever you saw who was not Rune Arledge. So maybe we could tell some of that at the same time that you talk about this. And so on that silly note, now bring up our great friend who went away and became famous, but knows where his roots are, and came back to Chapel Hill to teach school and be of service to this community and be a part of the town where he started. Please welcome Jim Lampley.
Thank you, boss. Much appreciated.
Go get him.
Yeah.
Oh, here you are. You got him.
All right. So, I don't want to bore you with a long speech, and I don't want to give away too much of what is in the book, because after all, logic says, if you want to know what's in the book, buy the book. But at the end of the day, most of the time when I do this, I do give away too much, or at least so my wife tells me, because once you get me started telling stories, then you have lit the torch of a congenital storyteller. And as the book establishes and elucidates for you, the reason that I am a congenital storyteller is not just my lifelong passion for sports. Not just that my father died when I was 5 years old and I was consciously trying to put back something in my life that everybody told me he would have ordained and wanted. But also because after my father, a Chrysler dealer in Hendersonville, North Carolina, the club champion of the Hendersonville Golf and Country Club, the course record holder of the Hendersonville Golf and Country Club, after he died when I was 5 years old, his mother, my paternal grandmother, and his widow, my by now twice widowed mother, competed for my attention for the next 30 years. And their vehicle for competing for my attention was to tell me stories. I would sit at my grandmother's table in Hendersonville, North Carolina, all summer long, and listen to her beautiful, perfectly crafted, entirely logical and meaningful stories. And then I would go home to Miami, Florida, where my mother was struggling to try to sell life insurance to keep us together, body and soul, etc., and listen for 9 months in that kitchen to the counterpoint, because my mother's view of the world was entirely different than my grandmother's. They were both spectacularly effective storytellers. And when Art Chansky convinced me a couple of years ago that now that I had cycled through virtually every identifiable network in America, now that I had returned to Chapel Hill to teach and taught for 5 semesters until I simply couldn't stand it anymore, teaching a course in evolution of storytelling in American electronic news media, not sports media, and attempting on an almost daily basis to get them to understand I repeated the mantra so many times that it's stuck in my brain. If you wake up every morning and you insist on getting your first dose of real news and what's going on in the world from your preferred social media feed, you are asking to be subdivided, you are asking to be colonized, you are asking, in effect, to be lied to, because those media are not about truth. That's why conventional media exists. Once I got used to seeing the blank, glazed over expressions on the faces of my students when I said it, and they would come back to class the next day and parrot something that they had clearly picked up from social media, after a while I thought, oh, okay, why keep beating my head against this particular wall? And that was the moment at which Chansky said to me, okay, it's time to write your book. And I said, well, I don't know, Art, that sounds like a pretty prodigious task. And he said, no. It's not that difficult a task. I'll deal with the publisher. I'll deal with, setting up all the business particulars of all this. I will tell you what's good and bad from what you write. All you have to do is sit down, cycle your mother and your grandmother, and repeat in their words and in their style all of the stories from your past, because your past is, I think the word he used was bizarre, and it is extremely unusual. Jim Hebner is not the only person who tried to steer me down the right path in the broadcasting business. Jim Hebner was an enormously meaningful and important mentor to me. And I managed, with Holliday's help, to wind up working on WCHL, football and basketball radio network deliveries, and also working for WUNC TV. And one thing that was firmly imprinted on my mind after a while was the night we were driving to a game in Winston-Salem or Charlotte or somewhere, and Hebner kind of leaned over the back seat and said, Lampley, you're really good at all this on-the-air stuff. You're very gifted. You are able to communicate fluently. If you stay in this business over the course of a long period of time, I can see you doing meaningful things on the air. But you don't control that. That's controlled by the people in the power structure who seek talent and determine the flow of your career. If you want to be self-determined, if you want autonomy, the path to that is sales to management. Look at me. And, I understood everything he said. And the last thing he said to button it up was, and we're still in the car, he said, if you wind up being addicted to the camera and the microphone, you could very easily end up hauling equipment in New Bern when you're 46 years old. So I had seen New Bern during the Galifianakis for Senate campaign in 1972. 46 seemed like a million to me. I was pretty sure that Jim was 100% correct about all of that, and I was going to follow the path that he suggested for me. And then along came this bizarre accident. ABC Sports wanted at that moment to launch a new vehicle, put a college age or close to college age person on the sideline of college football. Where did that come from? Some of you have probably seen the movie November 5, 1972 Munich massacre in Munich of 11 Israeli athletes by Black September terrorists. That was a 9-day enterprise in Munich, which dominated both the sports and news telecasts from there. And in attempting to cover it, in fact, to respond to the pressures created by two different, very famous ABC reporters, and I'll let you read the book to see what their names are. They, meaning ABC, had discovered that radio frequency cameras and microphones would do things that they had not thought they would do. They discovered that the transmission would go over a concrete barrier or around a metal wall. And they were far further along down the line than they had thought they were in terms of that level of electronics. And when they came back from Munich, they convened a meeting in New York of the sports, news, and engineering divisions to settle the basic question of, okay, now that we know this, now that we've learned all this, trying to satisfy Jennings and Cosell. See, I told you I wouldn't tell you. What are we going to do with it? And the first idea that was adopted was we could put a reporter on the sideline of a football game. And somebody in the room said, okay, that'd be great for Monday Night Football. And Drew Arledge, who was a genius, said, no, not Monday Night Football. The NFL's not ready for that. College football, through the vehicle of an ad agency in New York named Dancer Fitzgerald Sample and their Chevrolet advertising account, ABC in effect owned college football. Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, the Chevrolet account, accounted for 50% of the revenues. And so with that particular piece of leverage and power, ABC was able to do whatever they want to with the college football telecast, including putting not one, but two reporters on the sidelines of games. Myself, and I was the throw-in, last-second sort of insurance choice. And the first choice, who was a guy from Stanford named Don Tollefson, who had won a lawsuit against the Palo Alto Police Department on behalf of the Stanford Daily newspaper, making the Stanford Daily the first independent college student newspaper in the country to turn a profit for an academic year. And B, he had been driving around in his Volkswagen with a pup tent in the back on the day that Patty Hearst was kidnapped, and he was very near the Hearst Mansion in San Francisco, and he drove onto the grounds of the Hearst Mansion, pitched his tent, and proceeded to write the AP lead from that site for 46 consecutive days during her captivity. So once they went out to interview 432 candidates, and one of them was Don Tollefson, okay, he's a laydown. How are we going to turn down somebody who A, turned a profit at the Stanford Daily, and B, wrote the AP lead on Patty Hearst for 46 days? And that choice was made early on in the process. And eventually, as they got toward the end of the process, Mr. Arledge said, wait a minute, does this guy have a lot of on-camera experience and expertise? No, not really. But we said we were going to choose a novice. Arledge said, well, is there anybody that we spoke to who does have a lot of on-camera and broadcasting experience? Well, you told us that wasn't what we were supposed to look for, but yeah, there was one guy. So that was 50 years ago. And now here I am speaking to you, and now here I am peddling, and hoping you'll be interested in buying this book. It Happened. Where does the title of It Happened come from? Some of you probably know that, but it's extremely poignant in this moment in time, because It Happened was the spontaneous call I produced on the air, actually twice. It happened. The night that 45-year-old George Foreman, at the time my broadcast expert commentator colleague on HBO Sports, knocked out Michael Moore, November 5, 1994, to become the oldest heavyweight boxing champion in history. And as I was reliving the moment with the referee who did the count last week at the International Boxing Hall of Fame Induction Center in upstate New York, as that count was reaching 5 or 6, and referee Joe Cortez acknowledged to me, he said, I'm looking at Moore, and I'm looking at his eyes, and it's abundantly clear he's not getting up. And I'm seeing the same thing from my perspective at ringside and thinking to myself, what am I going to say to create a caption for this? What can I possibly say for this caption that will elevate or glorify a moment already so glorious it's almost beyond belief? Foreman was wearing, in the ring that night, the same trunks he had worn 20 years before against Muhammad Ali and Zaire. This was all deep in his psychology and gestalt, a form of revenge for something he thought shouldn't have happened, which was the rumble in the jungle, the rope-a-dope strategy, Ali kind of tricking him and getting the best of it, Ali getting all the credit in the world for having done that, when Foreman thought he had just gotten lucky and was still tweaked by that 20 years later. So he wore those trunks into the ring. He also memorized and recited out loud while he was walking to the ring the lyrics from The Impossible Dream, Man of La Mancha. And George is nothing if not, or was nothing if not, a sentimental character. So I was very excited about this book coming out, and particularly that the title comes from my relationship with George and what he accomplished, and it becomes almost stunningly poignant that he died unexpectedly without any fanfare or advance warning whatsoever 2 weeks before the publication of the book. So the title comes from Foreman and my relationship with him. The prologue, first thing you read in the book, is about the 19-year-old me watching the 19-year-old George win his gold medal in Mexico City in 1968, and then prance around the ring afterward with 2 little American flags in his hands as the visible counterpoint to Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who had produced an entirely different kind of American flag commemoration 9 days before. So all of those things kind of come together and collect themselves in the book. And I wrote it without notes. I listened to my mother and my grandmother. I would write whatever I wanted to write in a given day until I felt I had been pretty productive. I would lie down that night, put my head on the pillow and think, okay, this is what you've written so far. What comes next? No notes, no outline, no structured approach. I was just sort of winging it and hoping that my mother and my grandmother would carry me through. And eventually I reached a point where I said to my beloved co-author and supporter, Art Chansky, I think I might have finished a book. And Art was reading it all along as I was providing it the pages day to day, and he said, yeah. I said, I totally agree that you finished a book. And I said, is it a good book? And he said, no, Jim, it's not a good book. It's a great book. And you should be very, very proud. And I'm going to be proud to have my name on the cover. I love him. He helped me in a lot of different ways, but my mother and my grandmother wrote the book. So with all of that having been said, I'm here to sell, obviously. I love this bio. I don't know who put this bio together. I should offer a door prize to whoever it is who can figure out which line in the bio is patently false, and about which I should never tell you that it's patently false. If anybody can pick that out, they probably do deserve a door prize, but I'm only joking about the door prize because I didn't bring anything meaningful that I could give away. But maybe a book would be appropriate for somebody who can look at this beautifully written, great bio, which I love so much, and say, aha, I see the fly in the ointment. This particular line isn't true. But I see it. You don't have to know. At any rate, I believe it's appropriate, would like to invite questions from all of you, because I'm a Tar Heel, you're Tar Heels, we're met under a common watchword. I love to say at this moment, 19, 20 years ago, living in Hollywood, I was standing at the bar in a bar called Barney's Beanery on Santa Monica Boulevard, and I was talking with someone else there in Hollywood, I don't even remember who at this point, who was also a Tar Heel. And we were chatting, going on and on and on, and eventually a woman I didn't know tapped me on the shoulder from behind. And I turned around, looked at her, and she said, what is it with you people? You're like a cult. All this Carolina, Carolina, Carolina. And I just looked at her and I said, madam, we're not like a cult. We're a cult. Okay? Get it? Understand it? And oh, by the way, there's another cult 8 miles away if you don't like ours. So thank you all for being here. And thank you for inviting me. And it's great to see so many friends in the room. And at this point, it feels appropriate to ask what questions, if any, might you have for the one-time only author.
Jim, this is Jim Kurz. I've heard some of your stories, and maybe
No, Jim, you know me way too well. You know,
no, this is not fair.
obviously not fair. Yeah.
But can you, or maybe you don't want to reveal this because it's in the book, but can you share the story of how the "it happened" idea came to mind in your discussions with George Foreman before the fight?
Well, that's a great cue. George and I were working together on on HBO Sports at the moment when he pulled off the Moore upset. And of course, I had covered the fight which made Moore the heavyweight champion, fight in which he had beaten Evander Holyfield in something of an upset. And in his win over Holyfield, which was pretty dominant, you could see what the problem would be, particularly for any sedentary puncher like George, who plods around the ring on heavy feet, waiting to land a big punch. And when you're working together as commentators, you have a lot of downtime when it's possible to have small talk. So several times prior to the Foreman-Moore fight, I would pull George aside momentarily at a crew meal, at a production meeting, at meetings with fighters, etc. I'd find a moment 3 or 4 times to ask him, George, how in the world are you going to beat Moore? He's 26 years old. He's unbeaten. He's a southpaw. Holyfield couldn't find him, and Holyfield has much faster feet than you do. So what's the plan? How are you going to beat this guy? And Foreman, every single time, would fix his implacable gaze on me and say, Jim, you watch. There will come a moment late in the fight when he will come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. Always the same words. He will come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. Now, go to YouTube. Ask for the 10th round of Foreman-Moore, November 5, 1994, and tell me that there is any more accurate description of what happened than that Moore came and stood in front of him and let George knock him out. It's almost beyond belief, but it's a mark of something that a lot of people never got, and which I harp on to this day, sometimes to incredulous audiences. George Foreman was a genius. George Foreman was one of the most brilliant men I ever met. And when people say, what are you talking about? I always say, well, look at the bank account. Okay? No agent or attorney was choosing those products. George chose the products that he was going to endorse. George recognized where his personality would fit. George understood that his big smile and his big physical presence were enough. That if he managed all that the right way. I know, by the way, how many people in the room have never owned a Foreman grill? 3 or 4 or 5 of you, but you are a very small minority, all right? Most of the people in the room have at some point owned a Foreman grill, and maybe even have one right now, because it was an incomparably effective product. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for coming here. It's a delight.
Oh, it's my privilege.
But I believe you got to work with Howard Cosell. Is that right?
I did work with Howard Cosell.
Your favorite Howard Cosell story?
Have a seat. How many do you want? Well, first of all, of course, I arrived at ABC Sports in 1974 as a 25-year-old novice who is supposed to be on the sideline of college football for 1 year. And then somebody else is going to come along to do that. Because they didn't want to go through the nationwide talent hunt process anymore, I wound up doing 3 years on the sideline. And the last 1.5 or 2 years of being on the sideline was spent bitching and moaning and screaming about how I wanted to go to regional play-by-play. I didn't care if it was the 4th game or the 5th game or whatever, but I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life on the sideline. And eventually I managed to get off of the sideline. And now my career is going forward. And I had a few brushes with Cosell. Obviously, he knew who I was. And then eventually he talked the network in, I think it was 78 or 79, when Cosell talked the network into giving him his own personal magazine show vehicle. Saturday afternoons, show was named Sports Beat. Howard Howard was the executive producer, so he structured the show. Sports Beat basically consisted of every Saturday or Sunday, I forget when it was on, but every weekend, Cosell would sit in the studio and do a lengthy interview with Sonny Werblin, Al Davis, George Steinbrenner, Louis Q. Always one of those four, all right? If Al Davis was on last week, then you knew this was going to be Steinbrenner or Q in the next week, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be the heart of the show. Always the same four guys. And then the other part of the show was that somebody, designated cub reporter, had to get on a plane, go out into the hinterland somewhere, cover a story that could be developed into a 5 or 6 minute feature, and that helped to fill out the program time for the show. So they gave Cosell a nest of offices on the 12th floor. Management's on the 28th floor. I had an office on the 16th floor. Now I had another office on the 12th floor. And the story of the office is good too, but that involves Keith Jackson. You'll read it in the book. When I was Cosell's cub reporter on Sports Beat, I would go into the office 2 or 3 days a week, just to kind of show my face, do some research, prepare for whatever trip I was about to make. And at some point during the period of time when I was there, usually 3-4 hours, something like that, Cosell would step out of his office, which was maybe 50 feet away down the hall, where the 3 secretaries, he had to have 3, were arrayed at desks in front of his door. And loud enough for me to hear, because I was the audience, really, he would say one of 2 things. One of them was, hired, promoted, 6-figure salary. He's a sophomore. This is insane. What is this network doing? I've worked at this network for all these years, and now they bring in a kid from off the street, from off of a college campus in the South of all places, to be on my show? What is this all about? That was one version. The other version was, the kid, Lampley, is the only other one here who can actually complete a competent sentence on the air. None of those other nitwits, McKay, Gifford, Schenkel, they couldn't do that if you put a gun to their head. At least the kid speaks English. So that was the compliment. The other part was the counterpoint. It was probably a little more the former than the latter. But I thought I actually thought for a while, foolishly, that I had something like a positive working relationship with Howard Cosell. After all, he was the executive producer of his show. So at some point he had to have agreed to the idea that Lampley would be the cub reporter. Maybe because, it couldn't be one of those other people. But at the end of the day, we coexisted, we knew each other. Much later, 1987, I was forced out of ABC by a new division president, the person who succeeded Arledge and wanted to get rid of me. And I wound up going to Los Angeles, first as sports director and then eventually as the primary news anchor at KCBS TV in Los Angeles. And CBS gave me a primetime interview show called One-on-One with Jim Lampley or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the name of the show was. And for the first show, I was trying to put 4 interviews together. I had Wayne Gretzky, I had Chris Everett, had somebody else, I forget who. And a couple of years had gone by. Cosell was no longer on the air at ABC Sports, and I had his number. I called him, I got him on the phone, and I explained, I said, Howard, I have this primetime magazine show or interview show on CBS, and I'm interviewing Chris Everett Chris Everett, Wayne Gretzky. And I said, I'd like for you to be the other interview on the show. There's a little pause, and he said, you want to interview me for a show that is your personal vehicle? Never in your life. Not in any way, shape, or form. Go away. Leave me alone. I have my own life now. So that was my last interaction with him. I knew not to push the issue any further than that. He was who he was. By the way, 90% of you probably don't know, Howard Cohen, real name, was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So he is yet another Tar Heel in his way. What else? Oh my goodness, we only get one question and it's about Cosell? How predictable was that? Huh?
Jim, how did it feel to be back ringside a couple weeks ago, in Times Square no less?
Times Square?
Yes.
So, a lot of you may not know that when the brilliant and unimpeachably correct, I'm sure, cell phone salesman from AT&T bought HBO in 1918, the most gloriously critically praised network in the history of television, they decided in their infinite wisdom to get rid of the boxing franchise. This is like saying, we're going to keep Yankee Stadium, but we're going to get rid of the Yankees. I mean, it was just ridiculous that they chose to eliminate the boxing franchise. So I did my last HBO boxing show December 8, 2018. From that point forward, we were off the air. Now, Randy, what was the question?
How did it feel to be back ringside in Times Square no less?
Oh, so then I went 6+ years without calling a boxing match. And the whole time that I'm not calling a boxing match, in the 6+ years without calling a boxing match, there are all sorts of entreaties on the web and in boxing publications, et cetera, et cetera. When is somebody going to bring Jim Lampley back to do blow by blow? They might not have known that, okay, in 2019 I turned 70. At this point now I'm 76, but there was still a continuing sort of undercurrent and groundswell. When is Jim Lampley going to call a fight? So now we're in a situation where there's a Saudi Arabian sheikh whose name is Turki al-Sheikh. Some of you probably know that, in fact most of you probably know that the Saudis have already bought golf. They now own the whole professional golf franchise globally in terms of meaningful financial impact and control. And now Turki al-Sheikh has decided that he wants to buy boxing. And he so far seems to have the money to do it. And I ultimately took a gig helping in the development of a new medium, which is called live chat. And a brilliant woman in Los Angeles developed a thing called PPV.com. PPV.com was me and 3 other meaningful boxing experts. Maybe I should say me and 3 meaningful boxing experts sitting at ringside, watching fights and typing live chat into the computer, and viewers can opt in when they buy the pay-per-view, so they chat back at us and stuff like that. And I was, becoming popular again on PPV.com. And one night in the fall, I was doing David Benavidez versus David Morrell in Las Vegas. I'm sure everybody here knows who David Benavidez and David Morrell are, right? But at any rate, very, very meaningful fight in Las Vegas. And suddenly, 2 or 3 of the boxing writers come over with their cell phones and say, "Did you see this?" And I look, and I can see that this is an ex-post. I don't do social media, or at least I didn't until I wrote a book. And now I am in social media, but prior to writing the book, I did not do social media. So they brought this over, and it was an ex-post from the Sheikh, Turki al-Sheikh, and it was a picture of me, much younger picture of me, good idea. The post said, "I want," might have said the great Jim Lampley, it might have just said Jim Lampley, hard to separate. But at any rate, he said, "I want the great Jim Lampley to call a fight for me, Turki al-Sheikh." And various writers and other media people came over, "Okay, here this is. What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know. I'm not represented anymore. I don't have an agent. I'm certainly not going to reach out to him myself. And oh, by the way, I'm not on X." So the guy who, he has already bought Ring Magazine. The guy who's running Ring Magazine for him came over to me and said, "Do you want me to answer?" I said, "Yeah, answer that I would be happy to have a conversation." And that wound up being a meeting at the Mark Hotel in New York a few months ago, at which he said, "I'm putting together this massive event, triple header of very big fights in Times Square, and I want this to be your comeback to Blow by Blow. And I shouldn't tell this part. It sounds too self-congratulatory, but it's such a perfect caption for the idea of an Arab sheikh buying boxing, right? He hired my former agent from CAA to, in effect, be an intermediary in determining what the price would be. And my former agent called me and said, I have been empowered to finalize this deal between you and the sheikh. What do you want your price to be? And I said, well, Nick, I don't really, I've never negotiated for myself. You did that. He said, yeah, but I'm not going to get a commission this time, so figure it out. And I said, okay, tell me, give me any advice you can give me. There's a little pause. And Nick said, Jim, think of the highest number you can possibly conceive, which is something that doesn't embarrass you, that you feel like you can go ahead and say in asking the sheikh for your price. Think of the most irrationally high number that you really believe you are worth, and present him with that. And I said, that's not going to offend him? He said, no, that's not going to offend him at all. That's basically what he wants to hear. So I thought of the highest number possible. It was almost embarrassing. I presented it. 2 days later, Nick called me back and said, okay, you're going to get your price. And I went to, now it becomes a very precarious position. If we get 3 great fights in Times Square, and I do a great job calling the fights, all good. We get 3 extreme duds in Times Square, fights that are barely worth watching. And I have to tell the truth, because that's what the gig is. So I walked away thinking, well, he's not going to want me anymore because I just told the truth about his dreadful boxing card and how it bombed in Times Square. Now we're waiting to hear, in case any of you have any boxing currency whatsoever, Fred Kiger, I know you do. Now we're waiting to hear whether Jim Lampley will call Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford on September 13th. And we all hope, ardently, all of us in this room hope, that Jim Lampley will call Terence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez on September 13th, because if Jim does call that fight, he'll get the same outrageous price that he got for Times Square. But if he doesn't, life goes on. I'm 76 years old. I'm happy living in Chapel Hill, and that's where we go from here. Yes, Tom.
Do you think boxing will make a comeback now with UFC kind of taking the limelight?
Tom, please understand. Boxing has been dead for 120 years, all right? Every day it makes a comeback in some way, shape, or form. Do I think boxing will claw back that part of the audience which has gone to MMA? No. Do I think that boxing will recede and go away and become invisible on the planet? No. I think that it has always been challenged, always been troubled, always been a unique outpost in sport, and nothing gets to people's hearts if they become a fan, quite like boxing, because it's personal. You're not looking at 11 players against 11 players, or 5 players against 5 players. You're looking at 1 man against 1 man. And you're looking at that situation thinking, okay, this is hellacious, man-to-man, brutal combat. The fact is, if you watch 2 fighters fight, a knockdown, drag-out, intensely violent 12-round fight. Then if you watch them do it twice more, as was the case with Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward, or Marco Antonio Barrera and Derek Morales, you are watching 2 men fall in love. I've seen this many, many times. By the way, during the overwhelming bulk of his career, Foreman had no love for Muhammad Ali. Foreman hated the fact that Muhammad Ali got credit for outboxing him in the Rumble in the Jungle and beating him with the quote rope-a-dope strategy. Eventually, we got to a situation where there were 5 living former heavyweight champions: Foreman, Ali, Frazier, Kenny Norton, Larry Holmes, And people would invite those 5 guys to come and appear at public functions, paying all 5 of them together to mine the unique charisma of 5 living heavyweight champions being together. And very early on, Foreman went to Holmes and said, Larry, you know and I know that if we go stand at these events together and Joe gets liquored up, he is going to want to get at Ali. And of course, Ali at this time is Parkinson's debilitated, etc. So, like I said, Foreman had no love for Ali, but he and Holmes adopted a pact that whenever one of these 5 heavyweight champions things would take place, he and Holmes would see to it that there was always somebody between Frazier and Ali, so that Joe could never get the chance to go after Muhammad in the way that he really wanted, that was still burning him after the hellacious combat of the Thrilla in Manila. And that's a mark of what a genuinely decent, humane man George was. I asked him about that long before he died. And he said, Jim, it's just common decency. You know, I didn't love Ali, but I have to respect him as another man and another human being. And by the way, another man with a spiritual commitment the same way I have a spiritual commitment. So Foreman and Holmes subtly, cooperatively protected Ali from Frazier in those situations. I don't remember what question got me to that, but that's something that I always love to tell. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Well, what a career you've had there. Tell me, what was the golden period in your career? Where did you grow most?
One moment.
No, what part of your career did you flourish, did you enjoy most, and why? And then,
What allowed me to rise to my level? Is that the question?
well, I just wondered, it's interesting to ask people, what was your best period of your life? 1976. What was the golden period, and why?
Okay, so I started in 1974, and you'll get this in the book. I went to the first Olympics. It was the Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, Austria in 1976. The very first Olympic event I ever attended was Franz Klammer's downhill, which is the greatest moment in the history of alpine skiing. I had never seen an alpine ski race. And by the way, you don't really see an alpine ski race. You feel it if you're on the hill. You feel it, you hear it, you understand it. It's even more dramatic than you think in some ways, because you're listening to an audience all the way up the mountain, and you're hearing the way they respond. And in case any of you here have never seen Franz Klammer's downhill from Innsbruck, go to YouTube again, or Google, or whatever. Innsbruck downhill 1976. It's the greatest run in the history of ski racing. And then you read my book, and you'll read the entire backstory, the details of how it happened. But that's a stepping stone to the real answer, which is I went to 14 Olympics. I'm the only one who went to 14 Olympics. I can remember details, vivid details from every one of the 14. I can remember every time that I went, how grateful I felt to be there. I think 7 of them as a reporter or play-by-play person, and 7 of them as a host. If there's one moment in my entire career that I like to reach back and touch, and it's interesting because recently, on a different subject than sports, I've been trading texts back and forth with my friend Bob Costas. Now, by the time I got to NBC, I had pretty much offloaded the idea that I was someday going to be the primetime host. I'd been the late night host at ABC. I'd had other day parts. I'd been the daytime host, etc. But I had never been the primetime host. And at my last Olympics, Beijing in 2008, at that moment, Dick Ebersole, the first person who ever interviewed me for a network television job in Birmingham, Alabama in August of 1974, or May of 1974, Dick Ebersol was the president of NBC Sports, and he called me in 2 days before the opening ceremony and said, listen, I just want to say, from the heart, I know, and we here in the management structure all know, that when you sit in that studio chair, you are as good as anyone has ever done. You're as good as McKay. You're as good as Bob, meaning Costas. We know that. We understand that. And I'm sure that it burns somewhere in your heart that you have never been the primetime host, and now that you are here at NBC, you can see the writing on that wall too. I said, yeah, it's okay. I accepted a long time ago, Dick. He said, well, I've got something for you. I said, on the first night of the games, when we first come on the air, there's going to be a 1 hour period or an hour and a half period, I forget how long it was, when Bob was not going to be in the studio because he's going to the opening ceremony to do an interview with the organizing committee. Said, so it's logical, it makes sense, but I wanted to be the one to tell you that it means a lot to me to be able to say to you, you will bring us on the air and you will host the first 2 hours of these Olympic telecasts. And that was his way of giving me back something that I had lost when I had been forced out of ABC Sports by a different executive. And by the way, the executive who forced me out of ABC Sports chose as his first vehicle for getting me to leave, assigning me to boxing, because he was so sure that I would be a bad fit and that would ruin my career. He didn't realize that his network had just signed a get-acquainted-look-see contract with a 19-year-old heavyweight from upstate New York whose name was? Mike Tyson. Exactly right. So the very first network fight I ever called on the air was Mike Tyson's network television debut. And it just goes to show you, best laid plans sometimes go haywire. He assigned me to boxing to get rid of me. Eventually I wound up at HBO for 31 years and became arguably the most revered blow-by-blow person ever. Luck is the residue not necessarily of design. Luck is the residue of luck. And I had enormous luck all the way through from the beginning, including meeting Jim Hebner earlier on in my genesis in broadcasting.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, have a nice weekend.
So the Sheikh gave me.
Sorry, there's something else.
And now I have this.
And drum roll, the winner is Chris Senior.